All right, book of Proverbs. We're going to do lots of review, see what you remember. All right. Book of Proverbs. The goal is to spend all summer in the book of Proverbs. We will see. That doesn't mean we're going to obviously finish the book, because it would be impossible to finish it in that period of time unless we did one of those like, hey, we studied Proverbs, but you didn't really study the book, like a lot of churches do. Hey, we studied Romans in 3 weeks. Yeah, okay. I bet you that was a good study in Romans. So what we're going to do is, that's why we're kind of calling it a summer in Proverbs, because we're just spending this period of time. And just to remind you, the reason we're doing this is obviously I feel, and I've been saying it over and over and over and over, that the church in general throughout the United States of America and around the world is demonstrating coming at things from every perspective but a biblical or spiritual perspective, and it's demonstrating a lot of lack of spiritual wisdom, but it's utilizing a lot of other ideologies in order to address whatever's going on. So what we need to do is try to convince ourselves that what we need to get back to is a biblical perspective and utilizing biblical wisdom. And whenever you begin to talk about biblical wisdom, then obviously what book does everyone throw out there as the book you're supposed to read? Proverbs. So that's why we're studying it, and hopefully it will be beneficial. So let's see what you remember. First, let's start with the title. Where did the Hebrew title originate from? From Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1. And what was the Hebrew title? You don't have to give me the Hebrew words, but what was it? Proverbs of Solomon, right? Now that, and then over time, remember sometimes it was called the Book of Wisdom. And then ultimately we just have in our Bibles the Proverbs. Okay, but I thought it was interesting that they focused on Solomon in their title. So once we move from the title to the author, one of the major authors and compilers and contributors to the book is Solomon. And we spent a large portion of our time asking what question? Why Solomon? Why Solomon? Because we do know that Solomon asks God says you can ask for anything, and what does Solomon ask for? Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, that he can be able to judge between right and wrong, correct? And so and we see that God gives him wisdom, that there would be no one had ever come before him that would have his wisdom, and no one would ever come after him that had his wisdom. And so in that case, it's easy to go, well, that's why we read the book of Proverbs, correct? However, before it's all said and done, Solomon ends up a what? A polygamous, serial adulterer, an idolater, worshiping false gods. And why did I spend? I know that's not the way you're supposed to start the book, but that's the way we started the book, because it brings up a very important principle. And what was that principle? I repeated now 2 times. Yeah, obtaining wisdom is one thing. Applying it is something different. And what we realize is that here's a book written by this man that has all of this wisdom, but we know how the story ends. And the story doesn't end, hey, look how wise Solomon was. In fact, it's kind of sad. By the time it's over, I don't think anybody would be walking by Solomon's grave going, well, look at that man. He was so wise. Right? Considering not only did he end up a mess, what happened to Israel? Yeah, it was never going to be back united in foreign human history again. So I think that there's a major lesson there and a warning. You can read the Proverbs every single day. You can memorize the entire book. You can pass every Bible trivia test there ever is on Proverbs and still be what? Not wise. Does that make sense? Just knowing it is not the same as doing something with it. So I think that's a warning that we need to really spend a lot of time thinking about. Who are some of the other authors who contributed to the book of Proverbs? Agur, the son of Jacob, and then we read about him in chapter 30, or at least we have him listed there. Who else? King Lemuel, chapter 31. All right. And then we talked about these, possibly Solomon being the compiler of the words of the wise. Remember them? Proverbs 22:17 through chapter 24, verse 22. And then we had the sayings of the wise, chapter 24, verses 23 through 34. Everybody remember that? Okay. All right. And then remember about 300 years later, King Hezekiah found more of Solomon's Proverbs sayings and added them possibly to this collection of wisdom. We talked about that in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 1. Everybody remember all of that? Okay, next. We try to define what a proverb is. And what was some of the definitions we came up for what a proverb is? Okay, say that again. A short, pithy statement. Okay, that speaks of life and human nature. All right. Anything else that we had down that you want to demonstrate that you remember? A parable. Remember, that's very important. A parable. Poetry. Okay. But we all know a proverb basically as a short statement, and there's a lot of different things that it tries to communicate, but it talks a lot about life. It talks about human nature. And it gives us, and it can approach this in a lot of different ways, and we'll talk about some of those different ways, okay? Right, now that was very important. And make sure we get this. However you define what a proverb is, the main thing to remember is proverbs are principles, not promises or prophecy. They're not some guaranteed promise. And what was the example I gave everyone to try to demonstrate that? Does everybody remember the proverb I gave you to demonstrate that? Proverbs chapter 12, verse 21. That was the one I gave you to demonstrate that. And if you need to look at it, does anybody remember what it says? There we go. Proverbs 12:21. There shall no evil happen to the just. There is no evil shall happen to the just. We all know that is not a guarantee. We all know that doesn't always turn out to be true. Or anytime something quote unquote evil or bad happens to someone, then you would be walking around claiming what? That they are not just or they are not righteous. And we have a biblical example of where that's not true, do we not? Job. So we can't. That right there tells you. I mean, look. If you try to use some of the other proverbs to prove this point, people will argue with you. That one's hard to argue against. And the reason this one's hard to argue against is we have the entire Bible where you had righteous, just people who suffer. Isaiah, Jeremiah, a lot of the prophets, do we not? The early church, the apostles, over and over and over. So no one can argue, can say, no, that's some guarantee. And if that one's not a guarantee, then that means we have to look at these proverbs as general principles, not promises or prophecies. Has everybody got that? I think that's very important. All right, next we start talking about the contents of the book. Remember our outline? We broke the book down into how many parts? 3 parts. What were the 3 parts? Number 1? Prologue to Wise Living, chapters 1 through 9. What was the key verse? 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Second key part. Principles for Wise Living, chapters 10, verse 1 to chapter 31, verse 9. All right. And what was the key verse? 15:33. The fear of the Lord is the instruction for wisdom, and before honor comes humility. All right. The third section. Personification of wise living. What was the key verse? Chapter 31:30. Charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And that goes from chapter 31, verse 10 to the end. All right. And what was that third section? What was a key idea that I threw out there that maybe most people would disagree with, but I threw this out there anyway? Yeah, that the woman there in 31 that is always held up as, hey, if you're going to be a wife, this is what you need to follow. There may be some truth to that, but I made an argument, is it possible that what that woman is there for is she is the embodiment of all the principles of wisdom up to that point in the book? And so we should see her not only as a model of maybe what a wife should be, she's a model of wisdom in a personal form. So when we think about all the principles of wisdom, then you read about her and you're like, that's wisdom in action. That's not necessarily, here's 13 instructions for a wife to follow. Now, I know that will make a lot of people probably upset with me because that ruins a lot of books that have been sold in Christian bookstores, but I think maybe that's a different way of looking at it. And at least we'll throw it. Now, when we get there, I may change my mind. But I at least wanted to throw the idea out there, and at least you start working with and struggling with. If you're a woman, you probably like my idea because you're like, hey, that kind of gets me off the hook. But it doesn't matter about getting someone off the hook or not getting off the hook. It's about trying to figure out how we should best read the text. And I think that that's an important concept. Everybody remember that? All right. And I gave you these little phrases. Everybody remember them? Subjects and statements, people and problems, and counseling and correction. Everybody remember that? Okay, now we're going to go back through them because this is where we're going to kind of build on and try to expand this. The first little section here we called subjects and statements, and we called this style of Proverbs sentence wisdom. Everybody remember that? Because it's a brief statement contains a complete idea. Each proverb then stands on its own, usually not connected to what precedes or follows it. Everybody got that? Everybody remember? And these capsules of truth presented in Proverbs comes mostly in one of three kinds of couplets. Everybody remember the three kinds of couplets? What are the three kinds of couplets? Contrastive, completive, comparative. All right, everybody got those? What are the three again? Contrastive, completive, and comparative. All right, now, let's see. If it's in your notes, this will be easy. If it's not in your notes, then I'm going to wait till someone can figure it out, okay? Give me a proverb that demonstrates a completive couplet. I gave an example for each one. Okay, say it. Proverbs 11:25, all right? Proverbs 11:25, if you need to look at it. Proverbs 11:25. Now, I know I told you it's completive. Can someone look at it and explain to me how it demonstrates a completive couplet?
You have the first statement joined to a second statement with the word and.
Okay.
And the second statement is completing or fulfilling or enlarging upon the first statement.
All right, so you have the first statement, then typically and then the second statement completes the idea that was first presented in the first statement. That's a completive couplet. Everybody got that? You should be able to identify those when you see them, all right? What was the next couplet? There's a completive. Next kind? Contrasting, right? Contrastive, right? And give me a proverb that is a good example of a contrastive one. Proverbs 14:21, we have agreement there, all right? And explain to me how it's an example of a contrastive. Okay.
So you have a first statement joined to a second statement using the word but. They are contrasting like the wise and the foolish, or the proud and the...
Okay, right. Get it. Okay. So it's contrasting two ideas. The first statement and the second statement are used to contrast something. Everybody got that? You should be able to identify those. And again, I want to make this very clear. I say this all the time, and I know I always get emails. People get irritated with me, and then when people try to argue with me, and I do this, people get irritated with me. But before I argue with anyone about a proverb, if they can't identify what kind of couplet it's using, if they can't identify some of these basic principles, don't argue about the proverb, because they are not in a position to argue anything because they don't even know what they're dealing with. Does that make sense? That you've got to have a starting point before you begin arguing about the text, and there's that people can identify what the text actually is, right? So, what was the first one? Completive. What was the second one? Comparative. And the third? Contrasting. And then the third? Comparative. All right. Give me an example of a comparative one. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 8, and explain to me how it's comparative. Okay, better and than or like and so. All right, and everybody sees what it's doing. It's comparing. All right, one with the other. Okay, everybody got those ideas. Make sure you know those three couplets. Make sure you can identify. Right. Well, now, what I should do is just grab the Proverbs, just open to different sections, read a proverb, and then you identify what it is. But you should be able to do that on your own. Now, sadly, you know what would happen? Guess what would happen? I would throw one out, and then guess what would take place? There would be disunity over, and which I want to make sure you understand. I want to make sure you understand this. If I threw out a proverb and nobody here could even agree on if it's contrastive, comparative, or completive, then that means we're not capable of even interpreting it. All right? Now, I know I'm going to get 900 emails about that, but I don't care. Like sometimes it's just staggering, like when you'll see Christians, they're arguing about this big concept. I'm like, we can't even agree on what it is. So you have to find that kind of agreement. You've got to be able to figure that kind of thing out.
If these three couplets are always using these three key words,
it shouldn't be a problem.
how is there a problem?
Look, I don't know.
Do you have examples of contrastive without using the word but?
I don't know if I do. Right? I don't want it on top of my head. All I'm saying is, if you right, I mean, you can take a verse. You can take verses that you would think there's no way to have a disagreement, and guess what you'll get? A disagreement. So I don't know how people can disagree, but I bet you that it would happen even right here. Maybe I'm too cynical, okay? But if you've been a Christian for a long enough time, and you just you'll pick up 3 commentaries on a proverb, and you'll be like, how is there disagreement? How can there be disagreements on this proverb? It seems pretty straightforward, but you'll get 3 commentaries going, those other commentaries are wrong, and you'll be like, that's crazy. Well, in fact, we'll try to do that as we go through some of them. We'll try to demonstrate some of the, it'll probably happen here. Someone will be like, I don't think that's what that proverb says, and you'll be like, what are you talking? I don't understand. But we'll see. All right? But I don't want to derail us now by doing that now. Okay. All right, everybody got that? All right, so those are the couplets. Everybody remember that? All right, those are subjects and statements, all right? What was the second 2 little words that I gave you that were important? People and problems, all right. In addition to couplets, a wide cast of characters helps impart Proverbs truths. You'll find the simple, the wise, the proud, the humble, the violent, the angry, the rich, the poor, the oppressor, the oppressed, sluggards, liars, slanderers, all kinds of different kinds of people, right? And what are those people there? They're to convey something. They were to give us an idea. Sometimes those people will give us the example of problems that people experience and people face. Remember, we talked about this in great detail? Yes? All right. A good example of this is one of the pronounced contrasts is between the adulterous woman and Lady Wisdom. Wisdom is personified as a woman throughout Proverbs. Please note that. Wisdom is personified as a woman throughout Proverbs. That's why I believe that the Proverbs 31 has been misinterpreted by almost every Christian on the face of planet Earth. I don't think it's necessarily there to give us instruction on how a wife is to act. I think it's simply, it takes the quote-unquote godly wife, and she's simply a personification of the concept of wisdom. You should learn about wisdom from that more than you learn about how to be a wife. But I'd be in the minority there, but I think I can prove that. Because throughout the book, how is wisdom demonstrated or personified? As a woman. So why would chapter 31 be any different? Right? That's the argument I'm going to make. Okay. All right. With such a mixture of vices and virtues in life, problems will inevitably erupt. So we talked about, we have people and we have problems throughout the book of Proverbs, and we talked about some different ways, in fact, that we can then be confronted with our problems or how we can handle them. And we talked about the different approaches. What's one way you can approach problems? Avoid them. Number 2, distract ourselves from them. Number 3, hopelessly surrender to them. Or number 4, Work through them to a healthy resolution. And it doesn't matter if it's people or if it doesn't matter if it's problems, those principles apply, right? There's some people that there's nothing but problem, there's nothing but difficulty, so you can try to avoid them, you can distract yourself from them, you can hopelessly surrender to them, or you can work through them. Everybody got that? Yes? Okay, now, here's where we've got the next, remember the next two words I gave you? Counseling and correction. Before we get there, we're going to step back a little bit, and I'm going to kind of expand on a possible structure and how Proverbs works, okay? So before we move to the next one, we're just going to kind of go back and add this to the overall content. I didn't think about this last week, but now I think I'm going to play. Remember, the longer it takes me to get done with the introduction, the longer my introduction gets, right? Because I'll keep like, oh, wait, I should add that. Wait, I should add that. Wait, I should add that. And then at some point, someone's like, are we ever going to get done with the introduction? And you know the answer is probably not. All right, here we go. I want you to think about how like understanding some of these elements in Proverbs helps you understand how Proverbs tries to impart that wisdom to us, that knowledge to us. And trying to find in some ways, Proverbs is hard to kind of figure out how it's structured, but this may be a key. I'm not saying it's perfect, but we're gonna try this. All right, does that make sense? All right, here we go. In the first section of the book, chapters 1 through 9, the counsel seems to come not in couplets, but in scenes of wisdom contrasted with folly. All right? Now, I'm not saying that's perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect, but there seems to be a little of that, all right? Let me read that again. The counsel comes not so much in couplets, but in scenes of wisdom contrasted with folly. Now, these exhortations are still in a poetic form, but the thoughts develop through longer discourses. Right? So in other words, it seems in this section there are times where maybe there's a longer section dealing with it where there's some contrasting going on, and it's kind of a little different that way. Does that make some sense? Now, if you will read Proverbs this summer and read it over and over and over, you can see these things. This is the difficulty. Whenever you're teaching a book and you're giving some of these principles about structure, you can write the structure down on paper, and then 30 minutes later, you'll argue with someone about how to interpret that book, and they'll be like, well, wait a minute, I gave you this very key element about structure, but people will ignore the structure, and here's the key. You will ignore the structure until you see the structure. And the only way you will see the structure is you have to read it over and over and over and over and over. So that's sometimes why there's a major problem and disagreement. This can be very frustrating. And I think this is true of anyone who teaches. If you've been reading and reading and reading and reading and reading and reading about a subject, and you think you've got a pretty good idea of how this subject works, how it fits together, and then you start teaching and immediately someone disagrees with you, well, here's the problem. You can start arguing with them, but you're arguing from a different vantage point. Your vantage point is, I've read it and read it and read it and read it and read it, and I see this structure. Someone else hasn't read it, so they can't see it. And you've got to stop and go, wait, we've got to get back to seeing the same thing. So sometimes when it comes to these sections, the only way you're going to possibly see any structure and see how things fit together is you have to read it over and over and over and over. Does that make sense? All right, everyone should say amen. All right. First section of the book, chapters 1 through 9, the counsel doesn't seem to come so much in couplets. I'm not going to say there's no couplets there. I'm just saying it seems to focus on scenes of wisdom contrasted with folly. And that the exhortations, they're still in a poetic form, but the thoughts develop through longer discourses. Does that kind of make sense? All right, good. Chapter 10 begins the use of contrastive, completive, and comparative couplets that run through the middle of chapter 22. So chapter 10 to 22 seems to be where you really get these couplets, contrastive, completive, and comparative. And they go how far? 10 to about the middle of 22. All right? In chapters 22 and 24, now, 22, 17 to 21, some kind of view that as a prologue, and it's kind of, I don't really know what to do with that, but typically chapters 22 to 24, many of the Proverbs take 2 verses to complete instead of 1. Everybody hear that? And chapters 22 through 24, many of the Proverbs, not saying all, take 2 verses to complete instead of 1. Solomon's couplets seem to resume in chapter 25 and go through 29. Right? The couplets seem to come back in chapters 25 through 29. Now, you have to argue, well, why take a break from the couplets? I don't know. When we get there, we'll have to kind of see, well, why is... Sometimes the structure may indicate a change in focus or emphasis that we're going to have to figure out as the reader. Now, again, we're not going to be able to go verse by verse this summer through all of this, but we will definitely try to look at some of these major sections. And then, if you have a Bible, go to chapter 30. Go to chapter 30. Start just skimming through chapter 30 and see if you see anything interesting in chapter 30. Anything interesting in chapter 30 that jumps out to you? Now, I'm not going to point it out. Now, those listening online always get mad when I do this, but that's okay. I want you to skim it. Do you see something unique here in some of the Proverbs? See if you notice it, if you see it, if you catch it. Here's your chance to look really smart. Look at verse 7. Okay, say it again. Okay, list. Okay. Oh, say that again. Awesome. Okay, we'll call these numerical proverbs. Numerical proverbs. See verse 7? Is it 2 things I ask of thee in verse 7? Am I right? Okay, verse 15, is it there are 3 things, right? That will be 4, that will say not enough or something along that. It says 3 and 4 or something like that, right? Okay, and then is it chapter 8 or verse 18? Is it 3 things are too wonderful? Is that 18? And then is it verse 21 or 24, somewhere there, 4 which I do not understand or something along those lines? Okay, also in 18. Okay, you get that? Those are numerical proverbs. Now, that's interesting that they throw in the numbers there, and you can kind of separate them from some of the other proverbs. Okay, everybody got that? Okay, I think that's interesting. And then, in chapter 31, King Lemuel shares the wisdom he learned from his mother. He seems to warn about kings and strong drink in verses 2 through 9. I think that's correct, right? And then, in an acrostic poem, where each verse begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet, he extols the excellent wife in verses 10 to 31. That's in an acrostic form, which makes it even more interesting. Like, wait, what's going on here? I think, again, I don't think he's necessarily extolling the virtues of the excellent wife. I think he's extolling the virtue of wisdom personified. Again, that's what I'm going to go with. That's what I'm going to go with. For now, all right? I'm gonna change that up, all right? Now, so let's go through these again. Chapters 1 through 9, what do we tend to have in chapters 1 through 9? Scenes of wisdom contrasted with folly. The exhortations, even though they're in poetic form, they seem to develop through longer discourses. Everybody got that? Starting at chapter 10, what happens? We have the strong use of the couplets. What are the 3 couplets? Contrastive, completive, and comparative, right? These couplets run through basically the middle of chapter 22. And chapters 22 and 24, and again, some believe there's a prologue in chapter 22, verses 17 to 21. Some believe there's a prologue there. You can draw your own conclusion there, right? But chapters 22 through 24, many of the Proverbs take how many verses to complete? 2 instead of 1. You need to take note of that. Solomon's couplets resume where? and chapter 25 and go all the way to chapter 29. What shows up in chapter 30? Numerical. And then what happens in chapter 31? King Lemuel shares the wisdom he learned from his mother. Now, is it wisdom he learned from his mother? Or is it just he learned wisdom, right? Personified as his mother. And then he talks about the excellent wife, which I think maybe actually just there, all right? So, this is what I want you to see. This counseling and correction, remember those two words? The counseling and correction and a lot of the things that are given to us in Proverbs, it's presented in many forms. It's presented in the forms of direct commands. You may want to write these down. This wisdom is presented in many forms, direct commands, observations about life, bad examples, and examples of its benefits. All right, let me get that again. So this counseling, this correction, a lot of this is presented to us in what ways? What's the first way? A direct command. Second, observations about life. Third, bad examples. And fourth, examples of its many benefits. Examples of the benefits of wisdom. Examples of its benefits. Everybody got that? Okay. Now, let's try to do this. I want us to try to. I'll try to. I don't know if we can end with this. We'll try to end with this. Let's try to compile, or let's try to come up with the purpose of the book. All right. Let's try to come up with the purpose of the book of Proverbs. Now, our first thought is going to simply say the purpose of the book is to give us what? Wisdom, and I think that's true, but I think we can kind of break it down a little more than that, all right? So let's go through this, all right? It seems chapter 1 of Proverbs. Now, if this was in a Bible college, I would make you do this, but it seems in chapter 1 that chapter 1 of Proverbs gives us at least 5 purposes for the book. 5 purposes for the book, all right? All right, and I'm just going to give some. I'm going to give some of them out. I may throw out some verses there to say this. I could change these 5, but I'm going to give you the 5 as that were. I can't remember who first came up with these, but I'm going to give them as they gave them, and then we could possibly change it up as we work through Proverbs chapter 1. Is that fair? All right, here we go. So the first purpose, or the first specific purpose given for the book, is to give reverence to the heart. To give reverence to the heart. All right. Now, if you look at, I think at Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2, because I want to try to explain why they say give reverence to the heart, because that seems like, well, I don't know about that. If you see in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction. All right? To know wisdom and instruction. Now, I want to make sure you really think about this, because when we say give reverence to the heart, when I throw out that phrase, give reverence to the heart, what does the word reverence mean? If you have a mobile device, look it up in a dictionary. What does the word reverence mean? See what y'all find. It's a good thing having internet connection now. I can make y'all do actual work. Say it again.
Deep respect for someone or something.
Deep respect for someone or something. Right? Is that correct? Okay. Deep respect. So that what they're going to argue is that the book, one of the things the book of Proverbs is trying to do is to give a reverence to the heart. And it's like, a reverence for what? And that would be the obvious question. A reverence for what? Yes? Right? Well, they are going to argue that the term wisdom is foundational to the book. We would all say amen to that, right? Now, we need to understand what it means. Here's how one person put it. In the Bible, in the Bible's wisdom literature, not just in Proverbs, but in the wisdom literature, being wise, listen carefully, being wise means being skilled in godly living. Wisdom is being defined as being skilled in godly living. Now, again, we notice it didn't happen for Solomon, did it? Again, he's the wisest man in the whole Bible, but again, I want to make sure we all remember how he ends up. Polygamous, a serial adulterer, an idolater, worshiping false gods. Yet that's the book we all tell everyone to read to get wisdom. And again, getting it is different than applying it or using it. Do what? Having doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything with it. He can walk around all day and go, okay, let me tell you we got this baby, how should we fix this? Oh, look how wise he was. He said, cut it in half. Oh, he's brilliant. Well, okay, great, he solved that problem. Now just think, he wanted to divide a baby in order to save the baby, while at the same time, his heart gets divided because he doesn't follow God's simple commands. Right? It's just interesting that that the first time, that one of the major examples we have of him is about the baby. And how does it ultimately end up? He saves the baby from being divided, but he can't save his heart from being divided. Okay? So, reverence of the heart, and it comes this idea that wisdom is being skilled in godly living. Having God's wisdom means having the ability to cope with life in a God-honoring way. Closely connected to wisdom is our need for instruction, which more than just the communication of facts means discipline, chastening, or correction. Taking wisdom and instruction together then means, listen, humbly receiving God's correction, taking Him seriously as we sincerely live to honor Him. So if we take the idea of wisdom and instruction together, see Proverbs 1:2? Does it have wisdom and instruction there? All right. Now, take them together. This is what it means. Humbly receiving God's correction, taking Him seriously as we sincerely live to honor Him. So what's the purpose of the book? To give a reverence to the heart. What's the reverence to the heart then? You take what seriously? Godly living. What do you take seriously? God's will. What do you take seriously? God's correction. You take it seriously. It's a reverence of the heart. I want to make sure, if you don't, here's the reason I think this book, one of the books emphasizes the reverence of the heart, is here, I want to make sure we get this. Why do you think it's important? Right at the outset, if we're going to think about the book of Proverbs, and we're going to come up with all the purposes for the book of Proverbs, we're going to give you 5. Why do you think it's important to begin with reverence of the heart as the first major purpose of the book? Why do you think that's so important? Okay, say that again.
All the issues of life flow.
Okay, all the issues of life flow from the heart. Okay. All right, that is a scriptural reference. Good. Anything else? I want you to really think about this. Thinking caps on. Why start with, hey, the first purpose of the book is to give you a reverence of the heart? Why would you start there? Okay. There's something you're missing. When we think of Proverbs, let me try it this way. When we think of Proverbs, we think of understanding a proverb as a mental thing. I'm going to understand a proverb. I'm going to know a proverb. I'm going to be able to interpret a proverb. And then you think because you know it, you can understand it, and you can interpret it, that you actually have it. Knowing it, understanding it, and interpreting it is far different than having reverence of the heart. Yes? One is a academic exercise, and the other one is something deeper is going on. Proverbs, Solomon seemed to know the Proverbs, obviously, right? He could have probably recited the Proverbs. He wrote a lot of Proverbs. How many was it? 3,000, I think? 3,000? Right? I mean, the only thing he had, well, 3,000 Proverbs. He was trying to catch up with women, okay? I mean, he got up to 1,000, so, he was 2,000 away. But he was trying to catch up with how many Proverbs he had. But the bottom line is for every proverb he was writing down, he was, getting 2 or 3 extra women, to make up for the one proverb. Well, what was the problem? What was it supposed to do? Give a reverence to the heart. Right? And what is wisdom? I just gave it to you a second ago. What is wisdom? Skilled and godly living. And the skill and godly living is not an academic thing. It is something that flows from where? There's got to be the heart involved. It's got to go deeper than the mind. It's just, I think we approach Proverbs in a very academic way. Yes? Like, hey, know this proverb. Memorize this proverb. Write it on your refrigerator. Boom! Now everything's wonderful. Well, how many proverbs have you memorized in your Christian life that didn't do, from a human perspective, didn't do a thing for you? We probably all know the proverbs that we've just completely did not follow in a million different ways. If it doesn't bring a reverence of the heart, you're missing it. Something you got to have a deep respect for, there's got to be something deeper going on. That's the point I want to get across, and hopefully you see that, all right? So what's the first purpose of the book? Reverence of the heart, all right? Everybody got that one? All right. Number 2, to provide discernment to the eye. To provide discernment to the eye. Look at Proverbs chapter 1, verse 2. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Everybody see that? All right. Now, does the NIV translate verse 2 a little differently?
Retaining wisdom and discipline for understanding words of insight.
Okay, words of insight. All right, same idea. All right. So to discern the sayings of understanding is the second purpose, to provide a discerning eye. The word discern means understand, consider, or perceive. It's the ability to read between the lines, to distinguish truth from error, right from wrong, good from evil, and be aware of consequences. It's an ethical insight that has much to do with the mind as it does the character. And to acquire it, we must diligently pursue it. All right, so let's go through this again. The word discern means what? Understand, consider, or perceive. Understand, consider, or perceive. All right, and it's the ability to do what? Read between the lines. Okay? To distinguish what? Truth from error, right from wrong, good from evil, and to be aware of consequences. Proverbs is there to give you a discerning eye. Please note, first the heart, now the eye. There's a structure here, right? The heart, then the eye. Your ability to see. Now, I want you to think how many times you've been misled or manipulated and you just completely missed it. You're like, you were convinced that, no, this is right, this is right, this is right. But anyone who can take 30 seconds to do a Google search and a little bit of research can go, that's just absolutely fraudulent. It's absolutely wrong. Now, the millions of times Christians demonstrate to me the lack of discernment is the most staggering thing to me. I could never have imagined when I first became a Christian that I was going to walk into a world where people would lack such discernment, believing all kinds of lies. I've told story after story. When I first moved back here and I visited Gateway, it was at that church that, hey, we have up here this petition because we're going to sign a petition because Madam Murrah O'Hare is trying to get Christian television taken off the air. And I'm like, I looked at Stacy, I'm like, she's dead. What are we signing? We're signing a petition to stop a dead woman from getting Christian television removed from the air? And all these Christians are like, okay, let's sign it. And I'm like, what? What are you? And the whole thing was a hoax. The whole thing was a hoax. And Christians buy in a church. I can tell you time and time again where you'd hear a pastor, I don't know how many times on Christian radio, they'll say something like, that is a straight up hoax, made up. And when I was on Facebook, I felt like I spent 95% of my time trying to correct Christians' posts on Facebook, going, that's a lie, that's misinformation, that's fraudulent information, that's misinformation, that's misinformation. It shouldn't be. And sadly, sometimes it's the atheist telling the Christian, could you get a little bit of discernment? We should obtain discernment from where? The Bible. But let's just think about it. Why should Christians have kind of the corner market on discernment? Because we believe in what? Starts with T. Truth. What should we care more about than anything? Truth. Does it matter what the issue is? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it relates to politics. Doesn't matter if it relates to medicine. Doesn't matter if it relates to the military. Doesn't matter if it relates to foreign policy. Doesn't matter what the subject is. We should be the one going, I need truth and I need facts and I need information. And I'm going to verify before I do what? Open my mouth or in 2020, we don't open our mouths. What do? Post. That should never happen. Should never happen. I saw Christians posting, and some even Christian leaders posting that protesters had stolen a tank, and they were putting, and they had these photographs of people. Come to find out, no, it was people who a rapper had rented a quote-unquote tank to use for a video. And the photograph was being used to send it around. Another thing was going around is that Black Lives Matter were telling white women that they have to shave their head to show solidarity, against racism. Come to find out, the photograph was used was about a young girl in 2012 who shaved her head to stand for someone who was going through cancer treatment. Now, these are things I saw on Christian posts from, in many cases, Christian leaders. Complete lies. Complete misrepresentation. Look, there is no excuse for that. Don't believe it because you see it. Research. And then what drives me crazy is one of the Christian leaders who got called out for it multiple times would not delete and apologize. He doubled down. Now that's just straight up pride. Now I can understand. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong and have to go back and apologize. Nobody likes that. No, I'm not saying you're supposed to woohoo, guess what I get to do today? I get to get back on social media and tell everyone I was wrong. Nobody likes to do that. But guess what? If you use discernment first, you wouldn't be in that situation. And secondly, if you had discernment or if you had a reverence of the heart, guess what you would care about? Godly living, which means humility over pride. We can't let this happen, and especially in an age now of so much misinformation. It's like you can't trust anything anymore. Well, guess what? If you don't know, don't speak. So what's the first purpose of the book of Proverbs? Reverence to the heart. Second, discerning eye. Number 3, to develop alertness in the walk. All right? To develop alertness in the walk. Look at verse 3. To receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and... Everybody see it? Proverbs chapter 1, verse 3. To receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, and judgment, and equity. All right? Very important. A lot of concepts going on here. The verse 3 gives us the next purpose. To receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity. These are the ways to walk in a manner worthy of God. All right? That's telling us how to walk. That's giving us an idea that we are to be alert in our walk and how we walk and what we walk after and what we are pursuing and what we're trying to accomplish in life. So, what's the first thing it deals with? The heart. Second, the eye. And third, the walk. All right? Now, what is all of this demonstrating? This is not an academic pursuit that you can sit around acting like you're smart. This is information that's supposed to show up where? In your life, not just in the church. Everybody got that? All right. Number 4. I got to go through these quickly. Number 4, to establish discretion and purpose in life. All right? To establish discretion and purpose in life. Look at Proverbs 1:4. To give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge, and look at Proverbs 1:4. To give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge, and discretion. All right? Or discretion. To give purpose, to give... So the idea here to establish discretion and purpose in life is to give prudence to the native, to the youth knowledge, and discretion is the fourth purpose. Discretion is the power of forming plans. That's how someone defined it. Discretion is the power of forming plans. No longer aimless, the young and the gullible will gain foresight in directing their lives. In other words, you will have discretion, and that you'll have a purpose, you'll have a plan, you'll have a direction instead of wandering around aimlessly. Proverbs is to give you that discretion and that purpose and that plan. Does that make sense? All right. Number 5. I got to go through these quickly. So, all right. To cultivate keenness of mind. To cultivate keenness of mind. Look at verse 5 and 6. A wise man will what? Hear and will do what? Increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. To understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. All right? This is very important. The purpose of Proverbs is to cultivate a keenness of mind. It's to help you do this, to ponder and probe the whys behind the truths presented in the Proverbs. It's to get you to ponder and think about the why. It's to get you to ponder and question the why. And a lot of people are really bad at doing that. Right? Some people can only see what's right in front of them. They can't go beyond why and how come and what's going on and what's happening. I've been trying to do this in a number of broadcasts where I've been looking at everything going on in the world. I'm like, okay, we need to get beyond what everybody is seeing and we need to go a little deeper. And I've talked about the political hijacking of the church. I've talked about the ideological blindness. When you're so blinded by your ideology that basically, if you remember the movie Inception, the ideology implants an idea in your brain and then that's all you can see. You can only see things through your ideology, and any facts that counter your ideology, you immediately declare them to be false and wrong because you're blinded by your ideology. I've been trying to go deeper than just the surface level issues. Now, some of the emails I get, people can't see. All they can see is, oh no, he said this, and you're like, you're missing the whole point of what I've been talking about. So I've been trying in my podcast to stress, you're missing the point. You got to listen to what I'm trying to say, but people can't see that. You've got to get beyond the what is happening to the why it's happening, and going deeper. So the Proverbs is to develop your mind so that you can hopefully accomplish that. All right. So what are the 5 purposes of the book? Number 1. Reverence of the heart. Number 2. Discernment of the eye. Number 3. Alertness in the walk. Number 4. Discretion and purpose in life. And number 5. Cultivate or develop keenness of mind. All right? Now, we're going to have to stop there. I have to stop there. I would challenge you on this. Here's a question you can ponder. What is the difference between common sense and wisdom? Some people equate wisdom with common sense. They're not the same. They're not the same. They're not the same. All right? Sometimes people do that. But that's sometimes people are like, Proverbs just gives you that good old common sense. No. No. That's not true. Okay? There's a difference between the two. And there may be similarities, but there's a difference. And you should be able to draw that distinction. I could give you all kinds of examples, but don't have time. All right? All right, any questions about any of that? We went through that as quickly as we could. Yes, no, good? All right, there you go. So, if you want to participate, then read Proverbs. We'll be utilizing sermons for it, and I'll be utilizing podcast episodes for Theology Central for it. So the key is to just spend the rest of the summer really, really, really just thinking about it, meditating on it, thinking about it, trying to figure it out, trying to understand it. But remember, it's got to go beyond just knowledge. If all you do at the end of the summer, you're like, man, I know Proverbs better than I did when I started. Well, congratulations. That's about as useless can be as far as what Proverbs is trying to accomplish. Does that make sense? Proverbs is not there just to give you knowledge. It's there to get you this wisdom, and now you kind of understand what it's trying to accomplish. And please note, it starts where? The heart. I think that's an interesting approach. And if you think about it, what's the beginning of knowledge? The beginning of wisdom? Is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge information? Fear of the Lord. So it starts in it. That's not the way we kind of think about it. We think about the beginning of wisdom is knowledge, is information. And it's like, no, it begins with the fear of God. Now, which you could go requires knowledge, but you got to have the fear. Right? Even if you know God, knowing God is not the same as fearing God. So you have to get beyond the knowing of God to the fearing of God if you truly want to have spiritual wisdom. And if you think about the lack of the fear of God in the lives of many people, then you can see why we lack any wisdom. So it goes beyond just that information. All right, let's pray. Lord God, we come before you this morning. Lord, we everyone in this room, we've all failed so many times to learn your wisdom, to apply your wisdom. We have failed to demonstrate wisdom. We sometimes demonstrate a foolishness, a lack of discernment. So many of the things we've talked about this morning, we've all failed to do. And we ask that you forgive us for our past. And Lord, pray that as we move forward, we would be able to demonstrate spiritual, biblical, and godly wisdom. And we ask this in Jesus' name. And God's people said...